Today we start a new series entitled Unto Us. And I am really looking forward to having a conversation with you about what the Lord was saying to the world and to us through this time of year. Now, obviously, as Christians, there are two big anchor points on our calendar. There's Easter and there's Christmas. And Easter is a weekend, Christmas is a season, and a lot of times Easter gets more fanfare. It certainly tends to get a little more attendance on that particular day. And I love Easter. I enjoy it very much. Everything that it represents. Easter represents God's overwhelming triumph over the enemy, His crushing of the head of the serpent, His defeat of darkness. That resurrection weekend is emblematic of God's supernatural power. His ability to override all of the laws of nature and do what some people deem possible. It is that empty tomb that informs my faith and causes me to wake up every single morning with the belief of divine intervention and God moving in my circumstances. It is because the Son of God burst forth out of that grave that I stand here today with authority over darkness, with the ability to stand in the strength of the Holy Ghost and the confidence to know that when God is applied to a situation, the situation has to respond. I love Easter. It's a good time of year. You know, Easter makes me want to shout. It makes me want to jump and stomp and dance and sing. Christmas hits me a little differently. This time of year has a little bit of a different effect. I tend to find myself often sitting in silent wonder at this God of the universe who condescended through the portals of time and space and revealed Himself in infancy to us in the earth. It's a beautiful time of year. And I'll admit, preaching a Christmas series creates me a little bit of anxiety. It causes a little tension in me. No, nobody's forcing me to do it. It's 100% my decision. But the reason it causes me a little tension is, number one, what else is there to say? I mean, what has not been said about Christmas and what is not being said right now in thousands of churches around the world? I mean, what new can I add to the conversation? But the bigger tension it creates in me is I'm not real confident that I can adequately articulate what I feel in here. Have you ever felt something so deeply that no matter what word you attach to it, it just felt like the word was incapable of saying what's in here? And so I'm going to try to preach a series where that's what I feel. I just love Christmas. When I say I love Christmas, I'm all about Buddy the Elf. I'm good with that. You know, I enjoy the lights. I've got a live Christmas tree. All right, it's live as in like it used to be alive, but I guess when you cut it, it's now dead and dying. Right? I even pour water in there. I'm not sure that accomplishes a lot. I love it when I walk out of my room in the morning and start making my way down the stairs and I can smell that beautiful Christmas tree. I love all of the stuff that's attached to Christmas, but I have found that the deeper into adulthood I get, that I love Christmas more as an adult than I did as a kid because of the beauty of God incarnate, the beauty of God revealing Himself in a way that confounds the wisdom of this world and defies the logic of the greatest philosophers. He just showed Himself in a way that many would say He shouldn't. You know, Neely and I, her and Michelle are not here today. She's battling sickness. Neely is. But Neely and I, we have a tradition. Several times during the Christmas season, we will sit in our foyer where that Christmas tree is lit up and we'll lay on a beanbag and we'll sing Christmas songs. And I'll pull out my phone because I'm terrible with lyrics. I'm just going to tell you, like, if there's a lyric, I'll butcher it. And I can't tell you how many times I've sung stuff and Michelle looks at me and says, that's not it. And she has the perfect memory, so she is certain to know every word that's off. But I'll sit with my phone and we'll sing through Christmas songs. And almost every single time that I've done that with my daughter through over a decade of her living now, it almost always ends up with tears rolling down my face. as I think of the significance of what this time of year represents. And so we're going to read from Isaiah this morning, and this will be a text that is our overarching text for the next few weeks together, and it's a decent chunk of scripture. You're going to just find with me that I'm okay reading a good bit of Bible in a moment like this, because I think the Bible can speak way more authoritatively than I can. And you'll also find that I read the Bible slow, and I emphasize parts of it. I'm not in a hurry to get to what I have to say. What he says is most important. And so I want us to just soak it in. I never want the reading of the Bible during the preaching of the Word to just be something that we move through, nor do I want you as a person listening to just look at it as something that is rote or lacking significance. This is a big deal to read the scriptures, and this is what Isaiah 9, 2 through 5 says. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in the land of deep darkness, a light will shine. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. They'll rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, and like warriors dividing the plunder. For you will break the yoke of their slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. How many of you'd like some yokes broken and some heavy burdens lifted in this place today? You will break the oppressor's rod, just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. Remember that about Midian. We'll touch on it in a moment. The boots of the warriors and the uniforms blood-stained by war will all be burned. They will be fuel for the fire. I want to pray and then we'll go. Lord, today is your day. And we sit here in reverence and respect of all that you've done. Jesus, you are the centerpiece. You are the focal point. You are the one that we're all looking at this morning. And I pray that as I'm talking, that I would represent your heart well. I pray even over the next few moments, Jesus, that you'd walk among us, that you would minister to hearts. You would minister to the weathered places or the disappointed places or the distraught places. And Lord, that you would embolden us with faith. Just talk to us, Lord, to the depths of our soul. Amen. I want to revisit the text and just give a little bit more language to it. It says that he is a great light shining in the darkness. For those groping in the dark, confused, they can't quite see their way or see what's up ahead of them. For those who are afraid and cold in the night. For those who are lost and trying to find their way home. Those who feel like they're in a dark wilderness. For those who feel like they've been waiting a long time for the dawning of a new day. For a breakthrough in their life to get them out of the difficulty they've been experiencing. For those who are shrouded in the darkness of fear or the darkness of anger or the darkness of sorrow or depression. I'm here to tell you good news. Christmas season is evidence to us that he is the great light of hope and that he brings warmth when he shows up for those who are cold. He is the light that shows the way when you're not sure what to do next. He is the light that pushes away all of the fear that darkness brings. He is the light that indicates that better days are ahead. How many of you could use some better days? He breaks the yoke of slavery. He snaps the rod of the oppressor over his leg. He lifts the heavy burden for those that are worn down. He's the liberator of our slavery to sin. He is the deliverer from the evil that encroaches upon us, that tries to do us harm. He is the one who, when we are weighed down, pressed down, being crushed by the struggles and difficulty of life, he comes and takes that load and begins to lift it off of us so that we can stand up straight again. He is the one who gives a remedy to our lack. He defends those who've been oppressed. He stands against that which has assaulted or assailed you. And when you're exhausted, He gives rest to the weary. How many of you say, I'd like to get in on some of that? This is who Jesus is. This is what He came to do. For the heavy laden, those bearing the weight of sorrow, He gives hope. To those who've been assaulted, He gives relief. To those who feel the pressure to perform, those who are weighted down with the stress of having to meet the needs or provide for others, those dealing with addiction, those dealing with life patterns that feel like they are robbing you of the vitality that rightfully belongs to you. Jesus is here to do work on your behalf. You'll remember the passage mentioned Midian and God destroying the armies of Midian. That's from Judges chapter 6. Some of you will remember the account of Gideon, who had an army of 32,000 and God whittled it down to 300. Gideon and the people of God were facing an adversary that was ruthless. I want to just read a couple of excerpts from that. It won't be on the screen, just hear me. For 7 years, the Bible says, the Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in mountains and caves and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites would plant their crops, marauders from Midian would come and attack Israel. They would camp in the land and they would destroy the crops far and wide. They left the Israelites nothing to eat. They took all of their livestock. The enemy would come as thick as locusts, the Bible said. They would arrive in droves of camels too numerous to count, and they would stay until the land was stripped bare. That was Israel's experience. When God was announcing through Isaiah that Jesus was coming, He used that tale as a reference point of what it's like to be a human in this ravaged earth. God raises up Gideon, takes his army from 32,000 to 300 and brings overwhelming victory to the people of God with a small fraction of an army. Because God wanted us to know that we will overcome, we will conquer, we will rise up, not by our own strength, not by our own intellect, not by our own human power, but by the power of the Lord. He wanted to give evidence that I only need a few to get a big thing done. So He references Midian. And there's some people in this room that no doubt feel like the enemy keeps destroying your crops. There's some folks in this room that no doubt feel like what's rightfully yours as a son or daughter of God has been stolen. That the enemy keeps stripping you of vitality that belongs to you as a person of the kingdom. And I just want you to know that the enemy doesn't stand a chance. And that the Lord is fighting your battles. And Jesus came to the earth to conquer all of this mess. He came to bring an end to war, to bring peace. He came so that you don't have to hate anymore, so you don't have to be angry anymore, so you don't have to be frustrated or violent or harsh anymore. He came to heal you so you can be a person of peace. And there's no doubt some of us who've been through some battles. Anybody know what it's like to go through a battle in life? You know what it's like to get to the other end of the battle and have some scars, for your garments to be bloody, to experience some pain or some disappointment, maybe even some repercussions for your own mistakes. You know what it's like to be worn out and weary at the end of a scrap. But I want you to know what Jesus came to do was to take those battle garments, throw them into a fire, and use them as fuel for your future. What the enemy sent for evil, what he launched against you as an attack to kill you, God takes and uses it to make fuel so that your devotion for the Lord is unwavering, and so that you can rest assured that all of that mess was setting me up for a glorious success down the road. That's what Jesus came to do. He came to make sure that whatever the enemy throws at you, that is not the final word. And it becomes fuel for all God's purposes and plans for your life. And then we get to what is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. And I say that every week because I love the Bible. But I love this verse. It's Isaiah 9:6, and this is the New King James Version of it. For unto us a child is born. I just love unto us. A son is given. There's just something about that phrase, unto us, that ministers to my heart. Like the explosive generosity of God incarnate. That he chose to condescend from the right hand of the Father, move through the portals of time and space and reveal himself. I just love unto us a child is born. And I am fascinated by the idea that God came in the form of an infant. That the Messiah came wrapped in swaddling clothing. It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. It's an absolute defiance of what everybody says is smart strategy. Everybody in this room who has ever had an infant automatically understands the complexities of this type of arrival. Michelle and I, we waited 11 years to have kids. And it was a shock to the system when the first one showed up. I mean, we had gone out to eat anytime we wanted to. We had tranquility pretty much all the time. And then the boy shows up, and we're like, what have we done? The first week he was home, he was the prototypical infant. He cried a lot. You know, and you hear all the adages when you're starting out in parenting. Well, if they're crying, it's either because they're hungry or they need to be changed or burped. He cried before we fed him and right after we fed him. He cried before we changed him, while we were changing him, and after we changed him. We burped him and he cried. He just cried. I felt like I had been lied to. All that three things, you know, if they're crying three things, that's a bunch of baloney. Sometimes they just cry. If you're a new parent, they just cry. It's all right. You're not doing it wrong. His first week at home with us, he spent his first week in the hospital just on some antibiotics, and then his first week at home with us, my immaturity was pressed. My selfishness was pressed. Every parent knows, right? He was crying and crying and crying. And we had done the three things. And it was like 3 a.m, and there was no relenting. His lungs had stamina, the likes of which I did not know were humanly possible. And in a moment of weakness, I yelled at him, "What is wrong with you?" And then I immediately fell into the bed and wept. I've yelled at my son. He don't know, he's helpless. The flesh has a way of rising up, doesn't it? I mean, you get it if you have raised children, if you've been around infants. They're completely helpless. They're defenseless. They're utterly incapable of sustaining their own life. They are the epitome of dependent. And that's how God chose to show up. Jesus could have come as a conquering warrior. He could have come riding on a war horse with an armament. I mean, he could have had sword and shield. He could have had legions behind him and just razed the land, ransacked all sorts of evil. But he chose to come as a baby. He could have showed up in a wealthy family or a politically prominent home, yet he was conceived to an illiterate teenage girl. He could have been born within the context of Roman citizenship as the dominant empire with affluence sitting on top of the world, yet he came as a Jewish baby, an oppressed people under the thumb of empire. I mean, he could have came just with the snap of a finger. God could have done it all just by saying it's over, but God chose to come and be near us. Why come as a human? Why show up in the form of infancy? It's the least intimidating, most incapable, unproductive version of being human. I think it's because, like Gideon's army, God wanted to demonstrate his strength through weakness. He wanted to show that even in the weakest form, his power was still pervasive. You know, coming as an infant, it offends our worldly logic. It messes with our ideas of how to conquer. It messes with our ideas of how to ascend or how to triumph or how to succeed. It messes with our ideas of leaning toward wealth or leaning toward power. He wanted to come and cause us to think harder and better about God. We think of God as the creator of the cosmos. We think of God as having spoke and the stars entered their fixed position. We think of God as having orchestrated the rising of the tide and the lowering of the tide and the moon and the sun and his voice setting the earth on axis. That's the God that we think of. And for 2,000 years, they thought of God as a blazing Mount Sinai. They thought of God as fire from heaven. They thought of God as this big, intimidating figure. And he said, I want you to think differently of me. I want you to see another side. And so he said, let me come in the most vulnerable way possible. John 1:18 says, no one has ever seen God, but the unique one who is himself God is near the Father's heart. And he has revealed God to us. What does it reveal to us that he came as a baby? I think it reveals that God had no desire to be detached or invisible. He was so committed to engaging us closely that he submitted himself into our hands, first at birth and then on the cross. He wanted you and I to know that he gets it. He wanted to erase any shred of doubt that God understands the plight of being a human being. Have you ever been abandoned? Well, he has too, as his loving disciples scattered at a sign of trouble. Have you ever been rejected? Well, he heard the crowds cry, crucify him. Have you ever been betrayed? He felt the kiss of Judas on his cheek. Have you ever felt physical pain? He was mauled and marred and maimed and brutalized by humanity. He knows what physical pain is like. Have you ever been sorrowful? He wept at Lazarus' funeral. He came so you and I would never doubt again that he knows what you're going through. I don't know why everything doesn't go exactly like we hoped. And sometimes we get so frustrated that the results aren't what we hope that we forget that we have this God who is present to us in the difficult days. And sometimes instead of trying to hurry up and get to the end result, there is value in looking over and leaning into God who became flesh and knows your suffering very well. We were sent a child which must grow into maturity. I think the fact that he came as an infant tells us a lot about how he views the progression of our faith. A child must grow into maturity, just like our faith, which is to mature through the years, becoming more capable and sturdy as we handle it with care. In that newborn, new creation, new birth, early day Christianity, we live needing the encouragement of other people to lift us up. As you mature in your faith, you learn to encourage yourself in the Lord, right? In those early days, things that feel absolutely disastrous and like they're going to take you out, as you mature in your faith, you realize that he has made me a conqueror and an overcomer over that, and it ain't going to take me out. Like our faith should grow just like this Christ child grew into maturity. Him coming as an infant, him coming as a human also reveals that God does not hate our humanity. I want to read from what is my favorite chapter in the Bible. Like this one for real is. Like John chapter 1 is my favorite chapter in the Bible. John 1:14, it's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. I love how Eugene Peterson communicated it in the Message. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. How many of you are glad He lives in your neighborhood? How many of you know He doesn't just live in your neighborhood, He lives in your house? He became flesh and blood and He moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. Hey, honestly, I grew up in a faith that had an undercurrent that caused me to feel like God was just frustrated and annoyed with my imperfection. Like that it was just something that He had to tolerate until He could get me to heaven. I spent a lot of my life, I'm a spiritual being, and I felt like I had to disregard or try to move past my humanity. But Scripture clearly communicates that He made you. Go ahead and point to yourself. He made me in His image. And He doesn't hate my humanity. As a matter of fact, He showed up in flesh and bone form. He doesn't hate your frailty. He doesn't hate your imperfection. I mean, it's just fascinating to me, and this is something you've got to wrestle with, but that He created within our soul the capability to make decisions, even sometimes wrong ones. But He is such a good God that even in the wrong decisions, He'll still work with us. You know, sometimes we tend to look at people and we see they made wrong decisions, and we become a little calloused if we're not careful. But we have a God that even in the wrong decision, He's willing to come near. He's willing to be patient. He's willing to be persistent. God came as an infant because He wanted to show solidarity and commitment to humanity. He came as a human because He wanted to sympathize and empathize with our human experience. He came as a human to model the full possibilities of being human. He came as a human to reveal the best way, the real way to be human. Have you ever tried to tell somebody how to do something and they weren't getting it? So you said, let me show you how it's done. He came to the earth to say, let me show you. I've been telling you for thousands of years, but I am so committed to you, I want to model it and demonstrate it in the same outerwear that you have. God came as a human to show His original design and plan for us before we became sin-ravished. He wanted to show you and I what was possible. He wanted to show you and I that we did not have to live beneath the dignity of our image-bearing nature. He wanted to show you and I that we did not have to live in the dregs of society, that we did not have to succumb to the lesser version of ourselves, that we did not have to live tainted and soiled by the depravity of this world. He wanted to show you that He was doing a new thing where you no longer had to live beneath yourself. He was revealing what it really means to be human. Unto us a child is born. You know, I laugh about my son, and when he first got home, having waited 11 years to have kids, I remember vividly, and many of you do too, what it was like when I found out that Michelle was pregnant. We were living in somebody's pool house at the time. I mean, it wasn't exactly a manger, you know, but it wasn't the other house. It was the pool house. And the pool house was one room with the bathroom offset. And there was a bed and there was a dining table, a little round table in there. And Michelle called me and said, hey, let's have lunch. And that was not really something we did much. She worked, I worked, we were busy. And I thought it was odd, but didn't think much of it. I'm aloof. I didn't get what was going on. And so I come to the pool house and she shows me the test. And I can't describe what I felt in that moment. And that "Oh Holy Night," that line that says "a thrill of hope," I mean, that's what rose up on the inside of me. I cannot believe this. And then we found out a little while later that I had been entrusted a son. I don't think it needs to be passed by that God entrusted the Son into our weathered, calloused, broken hands as humanity. And right now in 2022, the Son is still entrusted to our hands. What's so intriguing to me about this is God fully knew the human capacity for violence, for selfishness, for irresponsibility, for perversion. God knew that we were prone to lash out. He knew that we were prone to mishandle the holy and sacred. We had had thousands of years of history that made it clear that we were prone to mess up a good thing. He knew that about us. I mean, He knew how bad we could get, as evidenced with Christ on the cross, as the worst expression of humanity was displayed as we killed God on a tree. Like, He knew how bad we could be. But He also knew what we were capable of when it comes to nurturing, loving, caring, bandaging, sustaining. He knew as bad as we could be that we also had the capacity to be really good. He trusted us with His Son. I mean, I'm a dad, and my mom was way more trusting with me than I am with my kids. You older parents look at us now and you're like, y'all are soft. Whatever. They're still alive. I'm guarded. I'm protective. I'm exploratory before my kid goes somewhere and is affiliated and associated with somebody. I want to know. I will Facebook stalk some people. I'm going to find out. I'll read between all the lines. Here God looks at us and says, I'm going to put this vulnerable God infant into those hands. Even though God knows and has endured the worst of humanity, God still believes in humanity and entrusts humanity with His Son. I'm going to read one more text, and I think it's a fitting text because we have this God who was born in a meager manger surrounded by livestock. We have a God that upon arrival made His announcement to lowly, disregarded, culturally irrelevant shepherds. We have a God that was conceived in an irrelevant teenage girl. We have a God that was exposed and at the mercy of a fractured society. We have a God that arrived on the scene and hardly anybody on the planet knew about it. Clandestine, secretive. You know, we have a God in the form of Jesus that had to survive the edict of a tyrant named Herod who called for babies to be slaughtered. We have a God that had to flee to Egypt and practically be homeless. We have this person, Jesus, who at one point said, the Son of Man has no place to lay His head. And then we know what happened to Him. So I think it's really fitting that He says the things we're about to read. And I think it's perfectly appropriate and acceptable that He expect us who bear His name to honor these next few words. It's found in Matthew 25. Then the King will say to those on the right, come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. How many of you want to inherit the kingdom? Yeah, you want to inherit the kingdom. Verse 35, for I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones replied, when? When did all of this happen, Lord? When did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? When were you naked and we clothed you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Jesus was making a statement then, and his incarnation makes a statement to us now. We have this tendency to gravitate toward strength, to gravitate toward wealth, to gravitate toward triumph or to success. Like we just have this inclination to want to be around that which is shiny or pristine, to want to move over in the direction of that which is comfortable and convenient. It's just innate in us, in our flesh, to see shiny things and go that way, or to see powerful people and be in awe of them, or to see people that have got it together and move near them so maybe it'll rub off on us. But then we have this Jesus who saw the worst of us and said, that's what I want to go be near. I am on the throne, seated in heaven, 4 living creatures going around me calling, holy, holy, a sea of tranquility before me, streets of gold, angelic hosts crying out my praise. Yet that's not where I want to sit right now. I want to come down to the lowly and the broken and the meager and the hungry and the sick. That's this Jesus. And if I'm going to be a kingdom person, that needs to be me. He was saying, if you want to find me where they're hurting. Find me where they're broken.